The United States is at the edge of the so-called fiscal cliff. If lawmakers in Washington don't strike a deal on government spending and taxes by the end of this month, American austerity measures will kick in and they may start abroad. As part of the budget deal with Republican lawmakers, President Obama has proposed a $500 billion cut to the Defense Department's budget over the next decade. The Department of Defense is preparing for this nearly 10% cut, and the Pentagon's new strategic guidance document states in no uncertain terms that in the coming years, U.S. forces will no longer be sized to conduct large-scale prolonged stability operations in other countries. So is the post-9/11 era of interventionist U.S. foreign policy coming to an end? Joining me now to offer some answers are Justin Logan, Director of Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank right here in Washington, D.C., and Raymond Tanter, who served as a senior staff member of the National Security Council during the Reagan administration and is now a professor at Georgetown University. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining me.
Thank you.
Raymond Tanter, let me start with you. You know that at one time the United States was the world's policeman, as we've been reporting. When there were gross violations of human rights across the world, or there was violence of some kind, the United States entered the fray to save lives, we are told. Is that still the case?
Well, the United States is now a reluctant and smart sheriff, and there's no need when you are following a counter-terrorism policy to have a large footprint on the ground. So what President Obama has done is to size the force according to the new mission. When counterinsurgency was the mission, you needed a large footprint. Now counter-terrorism is the mission, not only in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, but in other places in the world where the United States could have landed forces.
All right. Justin, this smaller and smarter strategy that the United States is adopting right now, sometimes it uses questionable legal means. For instance, the use of the drones, the attacks in other countries.
Well, I think that the revolution in drone warfare, so-called, has actually, in some ways, been overstated. The United States is engaged in a lot of covert operations. It's engaged, obviously, the mission that killed Osama bin Laden was not a drone attack. That was actually a cross-border attack with U.S. military personnel. But I guess I would just
It did violate another country's sovereignty, though.
Well, certainly the Pakistanis will make that point very forcefully at every point that you'll ask them. So clearly it's the case that it has opened new avenues for debate about international law. I'm not an international lawyer myself. But I think in terms of the way America conducts itself in the world, drones have actually been somewhat overstated. We've had a track record of being pretty interventionist in a lot of different countries at a lot of different times. And so I guess I'd quibble with the idea that American strategy is that much smarter and the forces are that much smaller. If you look at what the defense budget will come out to if the sequester cuts were to happen, depending on how you count, that would put the U.S. military budget roughly on the order of what it was in 2006 or 2007, which were not exactly lean years for the Pentagon. And even if the sequester cuts were to happen, we would still be, again, depending on how you count, the United States itself would account for over 40% of world military spending. That's a pretty ambitious strategy.
That is more than everyone else combined.
Roughly.
And just to clarify the situation, they're not really cuts, they're cuts in growth.
That's right. So essentially what everyone is talking about, the $1 trillion in cuts, et cetera, they're cuts against planned spending. And it's particularly peculiar to hear conservatives talk about cuts in planned growth and spending as being devastating eviscerations of a particular budget.
Okay.
Anyway.
Dr. Tanter, let's get back to foreign policy. In the United States at the moment, is it driven totally by the interests of the United States, especially the security interests of the United States? Or is there sometimes a more altruistic motive? You know, we need to promote democracy, we need to nation building, that kind of thing.
20 years ago, I was on a television program with one of Justin Logan's colleagues from the Cato Institute. And the woman, Oprah, asked both of us, should the United States intervene to save Kuwait? He said no, and I said yes. Why did I say yes? Because when countries call 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, it's a 9/11 type call, not September 11th, but an emergency call. And the United States honors its commitments to its friends and its allies.
Let's fast forward from 1991, 21 years now, to 2012. Is that still the case as far as the Cato Institute is concerned, that interventionist policies are not something that the United States should be involved in?
Well, I think Professor Tanter gave a very good sort of summation of how the American foreign policy establishment views America's role in the world. Our interests and our values are one, as also I think President Bush adequately put it. And as Professor Tanter noted, we think of ourselves as there at the bidding, at the behest of a wide array of dozens of friends and partners around the world. And I think increasingly Uncle Sam has acted like Uncle Sucker, really, to do the bidding of other countries around the world. We squandered $1 trillion on a foolish war in Iraq that the entire American foreign policy establishment went along with because of these fundamental confusions about America's role in the world.
Okay, Dr. Tanter, Uncle Sam has now become Uncle Sucker.
I'm shocked that my colleague, who's a very distinguished man, would think that America is a sucker for defending its friends against their foes so that the light of liberty can survive. That's John F. Kennedy saying this in 1961, 62. When Colin Powell said to me, I worked with him when I was at the White House, General Powell said, people don't live in the air, they don't live on the sea, they live on the ground. If you're going to have any impact on what happens on the ground, you have to have the capability to put ground forces in. I am not in favor of putting ground forces in, and nor was he. But you have to have that capability as a threat in order to change the calculus of would-be aggressors.
I just think that the American military exists to protect the territorial integrity of the United States and the ability of Americans to live in a liberal democracy. If we proliferate commitments to literally dozens of formal treaty allies and a number of inchoate friends, pals, and different sorts of relationships around the world, we're going to be on the hook paying for their defense. That's what's going on in East Asia. That's what's going on in the Middle East. And that's why I say it's not that the American people are Uncle Sucker, it's that the great bulk of the American foreign policy establishment here in town believes that it's their job to extract money from American taxpayers and to spend it on other countries' defense so that they can spend their own tax revenue on a variety of domestic welfare programs and other things that we shouldn't be subsidizing.
Doctor?
Well, I'm willing to step up to the plate and defend friends against their foes. This is American idealism. America is not the cop. It's the reluctant sheriff who goes in and leads from behind in Libya and in Syria and tries its best to do good in the world. America is the only good superpower.
Is foreign assistance from the United States necessary for U.S. national security?
I think it's a very hard case to make that it's necessary for U.S. national security. If you look, for example, what we've tried to do with some of the assistance to, for example, keep the balance between Israel and Egypt, that looks very, very suspect in the wake of our on-again, off-again romance with Hosni Mubarak. And I think that's one of the things that really brings into tension this idea that our interests and values are one. We are cheek to jowl with the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia. And that is simply not the case, that our interests and values are one. When you look at the relationship that we had with Hosni Mubarak, sending envoys saying that he could stay, with the Secretary of State talking about being a close friend of the Mubarak family, and then once we think the balance has tipped, we say, okay, well now we're for democratic change. If you look at U.S. advocacy of democratic elections in the Gaza Strip, we were terribly unhappy with the outcomes of democracy there, so I just think it's an oversimplification.
Well, in fact, interest and values don't always coincide. The United States has an interest in keeping the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, but at the same time has the value of supporting the people out on the street. In that case, the interests tend to trump the values. But in the case of Tunisia, the United States didn't have to make that kind of a choice. It went along with people power. And it's now moving slowly but surely toward people power in Syria. And I'm waiting for the people power in Iran to kick in, where the United States focuses on the Iranian opposition and not just on the Iranian state.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time, but thanks for joining us. Justin Logan, Raymond Tanter, thank you very much.
Thank you.